The news out of Kashmir lately is, well, it's stark, isn't it?
It really is.
That terrible attack on tourists in Pahalgam, I mean, 26 people killed. And then the Indian Prime Minister's response, very direct.
Unusually so.
Yeah, and delivering that threat in English, no less.
Yeah.
It really makes you stop and think, where is this all actually heading?
Mm-hmm.
Are we, looking at an even more dangerous phase between India and Pakistan, which is saying something?
That is the central question. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you look at Kashmir's history, it's a region that's just constantly, it feels like teetering on the edge.
Always one step away.
Exactly. It's this familiar pattern, right? Violence flares up. India points the finger straight at Pakistan, accuses them of backing militant groups. It's got such a long, troubled past. Always feels like it's just a hair's breadth away from something much bigger.
Yeah, it really brings back those intense memories from 2019, doesn't it? With a real sort of unease,
That's the
Pulwama bombing, then India's airstrike going across the border into Pakistan.
And Pakistan's response, shooting down that Indian jet.
And capturing the pilot. I mean, that felt like the absolute brink. It really did.
It was terrifyingly close.
It's almost surprising looking back that it de-escalated then, especially with nuclear weapons in the picture.
It was, let's say, a fragile de-escalation, built on a few specific things happening.
Right.
Reports at the time, suggested the Indian strikes didn't quite hit their mark, so the physical damage was maybe limited.
Okay.
Critically, that captured pilot, he was returned pretty quickly. That was huge.
Yes.
And we can't forget the diplomatic pressure. A lot of calls from outside powers, particularly the U.S., pushing for restraint.
Important factor.
And crucially, perhaps, both sides managed to spin it as a kind of victory for their own people back home, which let them step back without, losing face.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But this time, it just feels different. That's the nagging feeling. Even though we've seen this cycle, there's just this heavier sense of potential danger in the air. What are the real game changers now? What makes this situation feel so much more precarious?
Well, there's several things, and it's sort of interconnected. A big one is just how much more unstable Kashmir itself feels.
Since 2019.
Exactly. Since India revoked its special status, its autonomy, and brought it under direct rule from Delhi, that move hasn't really brought the promised normalcy or stability.
Quite the opposite, it seems.
Arguably, yes. It seems to have deepened the sense of alienation resentment among the majority Muslim population there. And the policies since then, some aimed at demographic shifts, suppressing dissent. They've just intensified those feelings.
So the ground is fertile for trouble?
Precisely. And then an attack like this, killing tourists, it just rips open old wounds and flames those grievances all over again. It's a stark reminder of that volatility just under the surface.
Right. And then you look at the leaders, the political leadership, there seems to be a shift there too. A sense maybe that the current Indian Prime Minister might be less inclined towards the kind of de-escalation we saw back in 2019. What's driving that, do you think?
Well, the public language, the rhetoric, it's certainly more assertive this time, more uncompromising perhaps.
Okay.
And at the same time, over in Pakistan, you've got a change in military leadership too. The current army chief, Asim Munir, he's dealing with a really complex situation at home.
Huge political turmoil, economic crisis.
Exactly. The former prime minister, Imran Khan, is in prison. So in that context, there's probably a real perceived need for the military to project strength, to look resolute.
Right, assert authority.
Yeah. And that's maybe different from the previous army chief, Bajwa, who seemed more inclined towards de-escalation back in 2019. So the internal pressures on both sides seem to be pushing things maybe in a more confrontational direction.
And the wider world seems less focused too, doesn't it? The U.S.
Yeah, that's another major factor.
Their attention doesn't seem to be on South Asia in the same way. Key diplomatic posts empty, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that immediate need for regional stability, maybe it's just lessened from their perspective.
It certainly appears that way. And the consequence of that, well, one major consequence is the potential vacuum.
Which China might be filling.
Which China seems increasingly willing and able to fill. Their own strategic interests in Kashmir are significant. Think about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC.
Runs right through there.
It does. And then you add China's military posture along the border with India in Ladakh. That whole situation adds a critical and dangerous new dimension.
So it's not just India-Pakistan anymore.
Not at all. China's growing influence, its direct involvement, it means any India-Pakistan conflicts now carries a much higher risk of getting tangled up regionally. And without that strong, consistent U.S. mediating role we saw in 2019, well, a key channel for de-escalation is missing.
Wow. So we're looking at this really tangled web then. You've got deep-seated religious nationalism,
Hmm.
increasingly centralized, maybe authoritarian political power, these historical wounds in Kashmir that just won't heal.
It's a really concerning mix.
It really feels like all the ingredients are there for something potentially much worse than before.
It's a worrying convergence, yes. India's stated reason for evoking autonomy in 2019 was all about normalcy, integration, stability, economic growth.
The official line.
The official line. But underneath that, many see the ruling BJP's long-standing ideological agenda, rooted in Hindu nationalism, aiming to consolidate central power, maybe erode Kashmir's unique identity.
And that clash.
That clash between the stated goals and the perceived underlying ideology, that's just fuel on the fire. It keeps the unrest going.
And when you hear the Indian Prime Minister making these strong statements vowing revenge, you can't really separate that from the domestic political strategy, can you?
No, they're linked.
It's about projecting that image, isn't it? The strong nationalistic leader who'll protect India. It feels like these security crises, sadly, they become tools to rally support at home.
Absolutely. Think back to the story told around the 2019 airstrikes. Domestically, they are presented as this decisive, effective blow against terrorism.
Right, a big success.
But open source intelligence, international reporting,
Right.
they painted a different picture. Pretty limited strategic impact, actually. Not much evidence of major casualties or damage inside Pakistan.
Interesting.
But the narrative, that was powerful. Great pre-election publicity reinforced the prime minister's strongman image. And let's not forget, Pakistan hit back successfully, downed an Indian jet.
True. Both sides claimed victory.
Exactly. Huge propaganda efforts on both sides, each telling their public they'd won.
Which makes this latest attack in Pahalgam. Well, it kind of blows a hole in that deterrence achieved narrative, doesn't it?
It really does.
Despite claims of a stronger security grip, this horrific violence happens. It just highlights how past military actions haven't really stopped Pakistan, allegedly, or subdued the militants within Kashmir.
It shows the cycle of violence is just continuing, unbroken.
Yeah. And then, looking across the border, Pakistan's dealing with its own huge internal problem.
Deep, deep crises, political, economic.
Right. And the military, which has always been so powerful, maybe its standing isn't quite what it was, especially after the whole Imran Khan situation, his imprisonment.
There's certainly been some erosion of public trust, or at least more public questioning than perhaps before, in that kind of fragile internal state. Well, some in Pakistan's establishment might see renewed tension with India over Kashmir as maybe a way to rally the nation.
A distraction, regain legitimacy.
Potentially. Unify a divided country, even if just temporarily. It's a possible, though risky, calculation.
Very risky, surely, given the state Pakistan is in. And then there's their military doctrine, that quid pro quo plus idea. That suggests even a limited Indian strike could trigger a much bigger response from Pakistan. That doesn't sound like a recipe for keeping things calm.
It certainly raises the stakes for any Indian action. It signals an intent to escalate beyond simple tit-for-tat.
But Pakistan still relies heavily on its nuclear deterrent, presumably.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That remains a cornerstone of their security thinking. And alongside that, there's the crucial strategic partnership with China.
Right. China, gone.
China has huge economic and strategic stakes there, especially CPEC running through Pakistan-administered Kashmir. That Chinese backing is a massive factor India has to weigh.
Because China wasn't happy about India's 2019 move in Kashmir at all.
Not at all. They were very critical. And then remember 2020 in Ladakh.
The border clashes, yeah.
China's military assertiveness there created, very suddenly, a real two-front challenge for India, having to worry about both Pakistan and China simultaneously.
That must seriously tie India's hands when thinking about how to respond to Pakistan now.
It significantly constrains their options, yes. Covert ops? Maybe. But are they enough to satisfy public anger after something like Sahalgam? Probably not.
And overt military action.
Extremely high risk of escalation.
Yeah.
Especially with Pakistan's current internal politics, the military needing to look strong. And you have to consider India's own military readiness.
Limitations there, too.
While modernization has been slower than perhaps desired, and large numbers of troops are already committed to the China border, that limits flexibility.
So it feels like both countries are caught in a really tight spot, driven by this potent mix of nationalism and significant internal pressures.
It does.
Pakistan might, maybe, see a limited conflict as a way to rally support, despite the economic risks, despite problems on its western border with Afghanistan.
It's a dangerous gamble, if that's the thinking.
And China looms large in everyone's calculations.
Absolutely. China's investments, their strategic goals, they're likely to be a major factor, directly or indirectly, in how this plays out.
So what's the worst-case scenario we should be considering?
The most dangerous path is, well, an Indian military response may be intended to be limited, but triggering a much stronger Pakistani counter-response than expected.
The quid pro quo plus.
Exactly. And then you get into a rapid, maybe uncontrollable cycle of action and reaction, escalation.
And in that kind of atmosphere, high alert, intense nationalism.
The risk of miscalculation, of unintended consequences, it's alarmingly high. Someone misreads a signal, overreacts.
And the ultimate terrifying possibility. It's always there, isn't it?
It is a swift slide into full-scale war, and with nuclear weapons. The consequences for South Asia, for the world, are just catastrophic, unthinkable.
The fact that they pulled back from the brink in 2019, it's no guarantee for this time, is it?
Absolutely no guarantee. The circumstances are different, the pressures are different, the international context is different.
So we have these two nuclear-armed states with these incredibly deep historical and currently escalating tensions.
Yeah.
It really makes you question, what is the long-term stability of a region like this? Can it hold?
That's the profound and deeply unsettling question we're left with, isn't it?